Hello and welcome back to another exciting episode of the War Report. And we got quite the show ahead of you. A lot of big things happening, especially in regards to the U.S. presidential election, especially in regards to Trump's foreign policy in particular. And Germany is going to be another big topic of the show. But without further ado, we will get into it and talk about Joe Biden, of course, the presumptive Democratic nominee, because there's that slight chance the convention could nominate whoever they want. But I mean, look, we all know it's going to be Joe Biden at this point. But just for the sake of formality, we'll say the presumptive nominee. Now, a Politico screenshot from a Politico article came out the other day, and it was written, and it said that on August 1st, 2 weeks before the Democratic National Convention, Joe Biden chose Kamala Harris as his running mate. Now, that was published on July 28th, July 29th, a couple days ago. And then they immediately revised the article, which means I don't know whether this is some sort of attempt at a gaslighting, whether some idiot just hit submit on a story that they figured was going to be that way. I mean, because they pre-write these things for when whoever does it. Like that one time on Fox News, they had the Ruth Bader Ginsburg, 1933 to 2020 or whatever, 2019, where because everyone was anticipating, oh, she's got to die soon. It's going to happen at some point. So they just have they have these things pre-made just so they can hit the go button when it's ready. But that came out on a Political article the other day, which does raise the question because we probably will know on Saturday or sometime around then who Joe Biden's running mate will be. Now, the top three names thrown around in the media, in political discourse, and by the Biden campaign itself are number one, of course, Kamala Harris, the senator from California and former presidential candidate herself. Number two, Susan Rice, who is the former UN ambassador and national security advisor under Obama's administration. And then some woman named Karen Bass, who is just a crazy woman from Florida, which I mean is no surprise, just some representative from Florida. And they are all, of course, strong women of color. I'm sure you knew that about uh, Kamala and Susan Rice.
Are,
But it,
are you sure Tim Cook wasn't on the list?
unfortunately, no. I mean,
It's an inside joke, guys.
yeah. If only you
The
knew.
fascist option would have been Tim Cook.
Of course, of course. If only you knew the machinations of what we say off air. Maybe one day we'll do a I don't know BitChute exclusive or something. But that's
We
that.
should. Oh my God, that would be so great.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm afraid in the country you live. I mean, probably in the country I live at this point, but our doors probably get knocked down by federal agents, and yeah, that might be the
It's coming.
last. That might be the last episode of the War Report. But with that, with that, with that tangent aside, as I was saying about Joe Biden, those are the three likely running mates. Now let's give an overview of at least the first two. Karen Bass, again, I don't know too much about to say anything significant about. So Kamala Harris would be what you'd expect. She's the strong prosecutor. She's sort of what they say is like Obama, but a woman. Which I was kind of surprised to learn that Obama wasn't a woman. But I mean that's aside the point. Half Jamaican, half Indian. Child of two professors out of some university in California. Grew up in the upper middle class lifestyle, but yet is black and is definitely like your average African American living in Detroit or Chicago. It's so relatable to them. And then, of course, the gaffes about her talking about how she was a pothead in college or whatever, and then her prosecutorial career, which makes her very unappealing to the further left of the party, which I mean, who will most likely eventually fall in line. But again, you have that. An administration with her would probably, I would say, be focused on the targeting of what could broadly be called dissidents, any right winger who does any activism or um, anything like that outside of the mainstream Republican Party. Pretty much anything beyond Trump or Tucker Carlson rhetoric would probably draw some heat to you. Now, how much they could do to you with the little constraints we have left on our government, that's again a question up in the air. But the weaponization of the Justice Department, you could probably expect to see that. It would be a very socially driven presidency about social change and progress and racial equality and women's empowerment and all the stuff that you would expect from such a candidate. So that's what Kamala Harris would be. And before I move on, do you have any thoughts on good old Officer Kamala?
Yeah, I mean, she's been noted to make like a really good jerk chicken. Um, she knows how to say like notice how she's really good at saying y'all. She's really good at that, and she's just can let her hair down. She dances like better than Pete Buttigieg,
Girl
which
boss, totally girl boss.
yeah, yeah,
Ugh.
yeah. So she's really good. She's she's I mean, I think no matter who Biden chooses, generally the the more progressive wing or the extreme wing of the Democratic Party is going to be immensely disappointed with, because it'll be yet another year that Bernie didn't make it. And but to be less sarcastic, I think they have a certain idea of where America ought to go, and if, frankly, any candidate that Biden has in mind, and probably Kamala Harris is the one that will probably trigger them the most, is going to be too normie, not progressive enough, I think they are afraid that that could spell a kind of contraction of their movement. I'm not saying they all feel that way, but I think many of them will. There's going to be a kind of activist exhaustion, and that does take place. Um,
Especially after a year like this, where, I mean,
yeah,
name any instant of 2020 and how much political capital the left has spent this year. Now, they have plenty in their treasury, but again, you're gonna run out
right.
eventually. Much more than the right wing, which I suppose that's all that's important right now. But again,
Yeah, they're saving the right wing is saving their energy.
yeah, yeah. I mean, saving that energy on all those principles that your opponents will definitely respect. But yeah,
Yeah.
but in general, Kamala, we could expect. I mean, of course, with Biden being 77, 78, pushing 80, I'll just say, he will, his vice president pick will be paramount compared to most other presidential candidates, compared to Trump, compared to anyone in the past. Because, again, at his age and with the stress of the office, it's very likely that he may not survive one term. He may not survive a year in office, especially with his mental
Mhm.
state, may be forced to step down, may be impeached for mental health reasons on the 25th Amendment, as you remember them saying, Trump is mentally unfit for office, we have to impeach him. Honestly, I could see even a Democratic-controlled legislature doing that to Biden, putting somebody more favorable in power. But with that out of the way, I'll cover this one next because there's less to say, and the one I really want to focus on, I have quite a bit to say about. So, Karen Bass is just really your typical sort of what you could call far left politician. She is the representative of one of the districts in Florida. I don't think she's the one that does the ridiculous cowboy hats. If you remember that from a few years back, that she had a dust up with Trump. I mean, which one of them has had dust up with Trump? But really, she's sort of Kamala Harris, but with less name recognition, which I doubt. But the one I really want to focus on is Susan Rice, because, as I said, former Obama official, very prominent in the Obama administration for many reasons, architect of the Arab Spring and a lot of Obama's foreign policy, his approach to Syria, his approach to Libya, his approach, again, to the Arab Spring, to a lot of things that the Obama administration has become known for, and what a lot of the mainstream Republicans will hit you on, a lot of the, I guess you'd say, boomer Republicans would hit on, is the Benghazi scandal. That it was Hillary Clinton, Susan Rice, and Benghazi, which, again, that was like, what, 8 years ago at this point? That feels like a lifetime ago, and I didn't even
Yeah.
pay attention to politics that much again. But the point I make about Susan Rice is we speculate about red versus blue empire, the direction of what Biden's foreign policy would be, where he would take America, not only domestically, but how he would project American power abroad. And if he had someone like Susan Rice as his second in command, a former Obama National Security Advisor, former Obama UN representative, that would be to the world stage, to all the other major players in geopolitics, you could say broadly, a sort of gloves off moment for the American empire. Because under Trump, I wouldn't. We have not had a retraction despite some of the moves. We've had a shifting, a bit of a schizophrenic approach to foreign policy where nobody knows what the American empire is going to do next. Nobody knows what real direction is going in. But Biden as president would give that direction, and then especially if he put somebody with the notoriety of Susan Rice in there, that would be a gloves off moment saying, we are going to confront Russia. Now, not like a direct war, of course, but there will be confrontation with Russia. We will get involved in Ukraine deeper. We will get involved deeper in the Middle East, which, again, we speculate would likely be support for the Kurds, putting that wedge between Turkey and Syria and having an American operation based there. Probably more in Iraq. Vain attempts to reconcile with Iran. Again, probably also vain attempts to reconcile with China. But point being is, it would be a return to that Obama foreign policy, except in overdrive.
Well, I mean, Susan Rice reminds me of someone else with her namesake, another Iron Lady, and that's Condoleezza Rice.
Oh, another national
Susan
security
Rice, in
advisor.
comparison to Camilla Harris, uh, right, and you know, Camilla Harris is not a serious person. I mean, I don't know how ruthless she might be. I don't know how good of a lawyer she once was, but her presentation is not a serious person. That's not something you could say about Susan Rice. And in that sense, she does remind me of Condoleezza Rice. There's something, you know, like implacable. Like they're not easily moved. They're not emotional. They seem both very analytical. Um, I still won't forget when Condoleezza Rice gave that famous speech, reprimanding the countries that didn't go to war with America on Iraq, which was literally like a page lifted, like on someone who had just been studying Spengler or Toynbee. That is in understanding the soul of nations. So Susan Rice, she's a serious candidate. This is a serious woman, and you're right. She could easily be very antagonistic toward Russia, especially when Biden. I cannot see Biden as a functional president throughout the remainder of his first term. Yes, inauguration day, maybe July 2021, but I could definitely see Rice instead of Camilla Harris. That would
Yeah.
just be, I think that would be a disaster, but in a way that is different than Trump. Like, the only similarity that they would share would be that they're both not really serious people. They're both types that like want to be liked. You don't get a sense from Susan Rice that she cares whether you like her or not.
Oh, absolutely not. You get this. I mean, she has those soulless eyes, if you will. Like you look, and she has no feelings, no regrets about anything she has ever done. Very similar to Hillary Clinton in that matter, except I'd say Hillary Clinton has a bit more touch of being a psychopath. But again, that's
Yeah.
topic for a different day. But she would be like I said, a gloves off sort of symbol for America. And in terms of Biden, if he gets elected, which again, unfortunately I'd say I think it's looking more and more likely every day. I think it would take one crisis to push him to his mental faculties because he can hardly function as is now just on a campaign trail and on a limited campaign trail because of everything being shut down because of COVID. You put that in. I'm eager to see the September debates, how those are going to play out. How's Biden going to stand up against Trump on the debate stage? That's probably the one thing that can pull Trump's ass out of the fire at this point. But point being is, yeah, it would take one crisis for President Rice to come into office, and especially if that is a crisis abroad with Russia in the Middle East, with Iran in Europe, wherever, because again, we have, like I said, I've laid out her track record. She is somebody that will not hold back. She is probably less the last best chance the American empire has to even preserve its former position as a hegemonic power. And I will say this, if she is not the running mate pick, if it is Kamala Harris, if Biden wins, I guarantee you she will become Secretary of State or National Security Advisor again, or in some comparable role. She will be in the administration, and she will be a large driving force on the Biden foreign policy if he gets elected, whether she's in the position of Vice President or Secretary of State or anything else.
Yeah, I would completely agree. I think it would be a terrible mistake if he chose Camilla Harris. This is me, helping the enemy. I think it would be a horrible mistake if they pass Rice for Harris. That would be, I think, a disaster. Harris is also extremely cringy. Like, you can barely look at her for more than 5 minutes or listen to her.
Yeah, I mean, and when she
Uh,
tries to act serious, it's just laughable. It's like somebody doing a skit. But like I said, I don't know a way to put this, but I wouldn't say like in the base sense, like you scream you're scared. But Susan Rice, in a way, is terrifying.
yeah, yeah, and I'm curious what she's going to do with the Iran deal because, of course, being in the Obama administration, that was a very important deal. But I mean, everybody knew that by the U.S. giving back the money that belonged to Iran in the first place, that maybe a little bit of prosperity, a little bit easing of tensions in Iran would, produce a kind of a liberal class, a liberal urban class. This is one of the things that America depends on for soft power anywhere, right? This is an aspirational class, right? And all those cringy videos that we saw of girls taking off their hijabs and dancing, and bugman guys, dancing to Western music or rap music or whatever. All those guys, they got rounded up and paraded and by the authorities and scorned and ridiculed, arrested, and that put an end to it. So this kind of leads me back to that CSIS episode I watched a few weeks back about how they're going to try to reset their approach to the Middle East, including with respect to Iran. And I think they're going to have to go hard, and in a way, people will be so relieved that Trump is out of office that essentially no one will care what approach Susan Rice takes. In the same way that people don't care that Obama deported 3.2 million Latin Americans back. Trump can't even do like 150,000 or something. Like, it's one of those things. People are emotional. They vote with emotions, and it is what it is. So I'm curious about how she's going to deal with Iran as well. But as you point out, I can only imagine that she's going to go hard on Russia, especially with what is happening in Belarus right now.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into that. And the last point I will make about Susan Rice is if I had to make a historical parallel, I would say she is the American Empire's Lord Salisbury in the sense that she is defining the next paradigm of the way the American Empire will conduct itself, similar to how Lord Salisbury laid out what his plans were for the simultaneous destruction of Germany and Russia, which, I mean, again, with the course of World War One, which I intend to do an episode on, almost came to fruition. Now, would she have the same level of success as he did, and again, what contributed to that success? That's again topic for a different time. But again, I get that kind of feeling from somebody like Susan Rice.
Hmm. Hmm.
Now, with
Yeah, I would agree.
with that out of the way, let's do a complete 180 and talk about Germany and some of the troubles with NATO. And again, we'll get into Trump's ambassador appointment because this is probably one of the biggest stories that's happened all year, if I had to say. I mean, aside from the obvious, like, big stuff like COVID or whatever, this is one of the probably biggest stories that will come back that will be a recurring topic. So Trump agreed to remove about 12,000 troops from Germany. Now, half of those are being redeployed to various other places in Europe, such as Italy, such as in Poland, such as in the Baltics, but the other half are going home. And Trump, of course, has been doing the thing that he does. We're saying, well, if Germany is willing to buy Russian gas, then obviously they don't see that much of a need for NATO, and they'll wonder why they're not paying enough. So he's doing his yearly routine about Germany's role in NATO and that sort of thing that he does. Which again, I can get behind to a degree. I like watching the infighting in NATO definitely, but
Yeah.
you have that happening. And again, the redeployment to Poland is no surprise. The redeployment to the Balkans, uh, Baltic is no surprise. Not Balkans, not yet at least. I'm sure there'll be some fire that breaks out there in the next couple of years. I mean, we're about due for another one at this point. But to Italy, I found interesting, and I'll get into why that is so in a little bit here after I cover some of these stuff about the ambassadors. But point being is, NATO is on the rocks again. Nord Stream 2, of course, the U.S. is still threatening to sanction. Germany is still actually holding its own this time. But then, on top of all of that, the ambassador to Germany under the Trump administration has had a vacancy for about the past month and a half or so. The previous ambassador Trump appointed was Richard Grenell, who is famous for starting the global campaign to decriminalize homosexuality, and also served briefly as a temporary director of national intelligence. That is who Grenell is. He was considered for Nikki Haley's replacement at the UN. That didn't come to fruition, but he eventually left as ambassador of Germany after several disputes with the German government in terms of the energy market, in terms of NATO, to the point where Germany expelled him and pretty much forced us to appoint a new one. And now, right now, there's some interim guy in there, nobody of real significance. But Trump's nominee, officially announced nominee, now this isn't speculation, this was announced by the White House and will be going to the nomination process, is a familiar name, Colonel Douglas Macgregor. Now, for those of you unfamiliar, I talk about him a lot on the show, especially in relation to Iran, because he is a retired U.S. Army colonel. He was the commander at the Battle of 73 Easting, which is the largest tank battle since World War II, and probably one of the most successful American military commanders in the post World War II era. At that matter, probably, I mean, really, the Gulf War is the only tangible victory you can point to, and he was a driving force behind that. And after his career in the military, which ended sometime in the 2000s, he's been a regular on talk shows. He's written several books, but more recently, he's probably most famous for his appearances on Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson will usually bring him on when they need to make a point about Iran or about Trump's foreign policy, defending his so-called withdrawal from Syria or whatever. This is the go-to guy that Tucker Carlson, that other people who are more skeptical of American involvement around the world talk to. And he's definitely got the track record to give claim to his statements, because a lot of the times, a lot of people make these same arguments will be dismissed outright. But again, when you're going up against a decorated colonel, it makes that a bit harder of an argument, especially when you bring out all these officers to make your arguments. It's like, it doesn't really compare. There's some weight to his arguments compared to other people. He was considered as John Bolton's replacement for National Security Advisor. That didn't pan out. He was considered for a Pentagon job a few months ago. That didn't pan out. And now he's being considered for the ambassador of Germany. And this is somebody who, in his career, said, now, of course, this came out after he was retired from the military because, of course, security reasons, certain stuff. He said the entire reason NATO was getting involved in Kosovo and Yugoslavia was to, quote, stay in business. He's questioned the utility of keeping American troops in Europe. He's pretty much questioned the entire setup of the American empire, of American foreign policy. And this is the man Trump wants to make ambassador to one of the most, if not the most powerful countries in Europe. And, oh boy, that would have repercussions beyond Germany, to the European Union, to relations with Russia, to pretty much that entire part of the world. And Frankly, if that gets through, I think we will see positive changes come around almost immediately. If with the clarification that he's allowed to do his job and seeing his amount of experience, I mean, he was stationed in Germany for like decades during his time as a military officer. I think he probably knows the way around and would probably get less bogged down in the bureaucracy than an outsider like Trump would.
It'll be interesting to see. Myself, I'm more pessimistic. I either think one or two things is going on. One is he's going to be struck down. He's going to be hampered. Pressure will go on Trump, and it's too little, too late. If Biden gets in, they'll get rid of him anyways. It's kind of like a remnant from the 2016 campaign when there was, and I think there still is, a very big appetite for talk about bringing the troops home, talk about reorienting relations with Russia, or at least understanding Russia's concern about NATO encroachment, and so on. And he's kind of like an ideal guy. And this could be a kind of like it's a campaign year, and this is the kind of guy that you could have rhetoric very similar to someone even like Carter Page, though he has nothing to do with the military, but several on Trump's staff initially did. But we saw how they got rid of Flynn right away. So I don't know what's going to happen. If this is for real, and let's say we ignore for a moment whether Trump gets reelected, we just stay in the here and now for the next 98 days. Then what this would mean is a kind of, I don't know, some part of reorienting relationships with Russia yet again, because of the situation with China is now out of hand. Have Russia and China been too strong a partnership that it has forced America to do this? Like, again, these are all speculations. I myself am, doubtful. I think this is a move from Trump for like people, that are generally more savvy, that read a little bit more investigative journalism, that have a broader picture, a broader understanding of geopolitics, because you cannot talk about America and ignore geopolitics. It's the most important geopolitical country in the world, right? So people who just focus on the domestic, that's silly. Anyhow, so I want to believe. I want to believe that this is going to be successful, but
I am in
very, very strong doubts.
I am in the same boat as you, and I am doubting if he'll even get through the Senate. But one key point of hope I have for him getting through is an ambassadorship vacancy in an election year probably isn't going to look too good. That's something they can throw at it. And if Trump can trot out that, oh, look, a great new ambassador. Now, not that would swing too much to the electorate, but it would be a talking point to a degree. Now, again, I think this would be an appointment that would have been much more effective if it was employed in 2017 or 2018,
right,
when things hadn't gotten to the point where they'd gotten now. Like, if Trump came out of the gate with this guy in his administration as an ambassador, as a national security advisor, or in some other position, we would have had a lot more room to work with. But at this point, I would say, like I said, I'm doubtful that he'll get in because he's been turned down so many times for administration jobs at the last minute. But if he did get in there and couldn't do much, he would his previous rhetoric, and his rhetoric on the job would call a lot of things into question concerning the fact that this is somebody who was outright questioning the existence of NATO. I mean, that's even beyond what Trump has said. Whereas Trump's main concern was, why aren't they paying their fair share? Why are they taking advantage of us? Versus this guy saying, this thing has no reason to continue existing. We have no reason to keep our troops here. So having that there, even in the rhetorical, like I said, how much could be done is really up in the air. But again, it's about like what it symbolizes, and I think that's a broad story for the Trump presidency as a whole.
You're right. You again, with a country as important as America, anything on the symbolic is incredibly important, right? Even if it doesn't happen, the symbolic itself has a force of action, right? Because even things that are said that are, or actions that are done symbolically in America have a historicity themselves, right? And they point in a certain way, and they challenge, let's say, a narrative, or to describe the way the narrative might be moving in a different direction, right? So you're right. There's, you can't undermine the relevance of having him, even as a suggestion, considering his rhetoric for that job. Again, it'll be interesting to see what manifests. But yeah, it's more of this talk about limiting NATO, and the fact is like liberal Dems don't like this kind of talk, and I think even people who fancy themselves as radical progressives, they're not. I mean, I think many of them who do probably have a job that's too dear and important to them anyways. But that's another topic altogether. So I think that, are they comfortable with a NATO retraction, considering the kind of animosity that's been built toward Russia? I mean, if America got heavily involved in a conflict on the periphery of Russian territory, if ever there was a time where they would get like backing for it from Americans, it's now. So like they say, there's a lot of investment for that to happen. A lot of investment has been put for that to happen, because of course, symbolically, if, let's say, Biden, Rice don't do anything, right, then that will look weak. Putin wins again, right? And of course, the narrative post-Trump will be, my God, we had a fascist in the White House and we narrowly defeated him. That's what it's going to be. It'll be
a fascist,
never again.
A fascist puppet of Russia, mind you.
Right, a fascist puppet of Russia, never again. I mean, really, like, to continue to speak of the symbolic, it's going to be a disaster. Anybody who voted for Trump, especially if they were vocal about it, 2020 to 2024 are just going to be horrible. So, I mean, but Trump is a jerk. He was a failure. He let us down. We let ourselves down in believing in him. But it was worth a shot, and he did accelerate certain things. But
absolutely.
But we will never have anyone like him ever come remotely close to the doorstep of the White House. Primarily because now there will be public sentiment for that to never happen again. It'll be a point which will never have to be argued. Yeah. Because it'll be established that a fascist was in the White House and he was defeated. It'll never have to be discussed again. Anybody who entertains arguments with the people that would support those notions will be vilified and ostracized. So that's where it's going to go. So then, what is going to happen if this guy is in? It'll be more antagonism. Are they willing to do it? And frankly, there's a whole banking and corporate elite that is invested in the universal bugman all over the world. And
I feel like they can't accomplish much of what they want to accomplish without NATO. I don't see if there is really like a segment of this elite. I haven't heard it yet on CSIS or some of the other sort of neoliberal think tanks that I listen to that indicate that they're ready to dissolve NATO, or like, hoorah, we're going to have an EU army and NATO. Like, they're not interested in that, and so it'll be a very, very interesting move on Trump's part. I promise I'll wrap it up, and we'll see where it goes.
But one last thing I'll leave you with on the NATO question, on the ambassador to Germany. With all of this, we have, again, soured on Trump, of course. I don't think either of us would consider ourselves Trump supporters at this point. But one thing I will say is the best argument I've heard for Trump, beyond the chaos argument I've made now, is that with the news that Susan Rice might be vice president or anywhere in the administration, that's enough to actually make me want to vote for Trump and support Trump, because, as I said, that is a gloves off moment. With Trump, we've had our bunglings, we have had our share of failures, countless. And again, but he's accelerated things, he's shaken things up. He's shaking things up just with the mere suggestion of putting this man in that ambassador position. But like you said, under Biden, especially a post-Trump era, especially after our last decade of our roller coaster relations with Russia, that would be probably the highest tensions have been. And I know I've said this before, but I genuinely mean this time. Probably the highest global tensions have been since the Cuban Missile Crisis. It probably takes us to that levels.
I would think so. Like, people forget, like, they say a lot of stuff, especially boomers, about the Soviet thing. Not like there weren't crises, but I think a lot of the crises were really dependent on kind of, often, and I hate to sound cliche, misunderstandings, or people on the lower down who weren't privy to a lot or hadn't figured things out on their own. Like, between 1970 and 1990, America bought oil from the great red evil empire that it was at war with. But
yeah, and then the 80s, they spent that decade importing food from the evil capitalist pigs in America. It was a very odd time in history, to say
oh my
the least.
God, the world is gonna just die in a nuclear holocaust, y'all. So I mean, I think the countries are much more independent of each other than they were then. Like, that should be kept in mind.
Now, in relation with NATO, to continue this trend, U.S. Navy Africa Command put out a press statement the other day. Now, let me see the exact date on this. I gotta pull it up here. But it's in relation to the migrant crisis and Libya. So, from the 20th July 2020, let me just read this verbatim. For immediate release, U.S. Africa Command press release. U.S. assists in rescuing migrants stranded in Mediterranean. Migrants stranded in the Mediterranean Sea off the coast of Libya were rescued by U.S. military personnel, heard their distress signals on July 21st. A U.S. Africa Command unit conducting surveillance off the coast of North Africa picked up a distress signal from an inflatable vehicle with 131 passengers that was deflating at sea approximately 80 kilometers northwest of Misrata, Libya. After receiving this distress signal by radio, U.S. Air Forces Africa responded to the distress beacon and coordinated Libyan and Maltese naval authorities for rescue aid. Our routine surveillance along the North African coast gave us the opportunity to lend a helping hand, said U.S. Army General Stephen Townsend, commander of AFRICOM. U.S. forces have had a long-standing tradition in helping mariners in distress signals and providing humanitarian assistance. Sorry, the text is very small on this, so I kind of got to squint. On July 23rd, the European Border and Coast Guard Agency reported that the Libyan Coast Guard rescued all 131 passengers from the distressed migrant vessel and brought them to safety. This rescue operation with coordinated assistance from U.S. European Command, was a team effort on behalf of people in distress. This rescue highlights the level of cooperation we've developed not only with our partners in Africa, but more broadly in the region, said Ambassador Andrew Young, deputy to the commander of Civilian Military Engagement AFRICOM. U.S. African Command uses a whole-of-government approach, including an emphasis on interagency and multinational cooperation to facilitate humanitarian aid in order to promote security, stability, and prosperity in Africa. The U.S. leadership helped achieve unity, said Townsend. International partnership remains important to addressing the multinational challenges. In this case, the collective contributions helped save lives. Now, they took these stranded migrants to Italy. And the place this ship left from, this little inflatable raft left from, was under GNA-controlled Libya, under the part of Libya controlled by the Turkish-backed forces. So, what we have now is the U.S. government, the U.S. military, defending our vital interests by smuggling what are presumably sub-Saharan Africans who cross through Libya, because that's where a lot of these people coming through are, into Italy. In the process, violating the sovereignty of 2-3 different countries by putting them on Italian shores. Now, look, I cannot, humanitarian, if you want to go down that road, simply take them back to Libya, sort it out there. But taking them to Europe, after especially even the more neoliberal leaders of Europe expressed concerns about the migrant crisis, and especially during what is supposedly a global pandemic, what the hell is going on here?
Yeah. I mean, this makes sense that some of the troops are being moved from Germany into Italy as well. Right? Because basically what they achieved after 1965 in the US was a kind of a blueprint for the whole West, right? Everybody will be as diverse as America. Everybody will develop the same Bugman
we'll all just
lifestyle.
be sterilized, atomized individuals and consumers. It'll be wonderful, trust me.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome. There's this new emerging middle class. And they're just going to force it on them. And they've under Trump there were a few things that could allow them to get away with, but honestly it doesn't even look like. I think even the GOP knows that he's not supposed to have a second term, and they're just not that they were ever a great support, but they're really absent. And I'm getting the feeling that we're going to begin seeing what the U.S. Was kind of meant to be under Hillary, or more accurately, what it will be under Biden.
Yeah, I think
so. Yeah, they're going to intervene. They're going to make sure that those migrants get into Western Europe. They're not going to tell Turkey to STFU and who do you think you are? We've given you enough leeway. No, because they're on the same page. And it makes sense because all those videos in Turkish where they you have even ministers laugh about how we're going to send all these Muslims into Western Europe. Ha ha ha. You're defeated. You're weak. You won't even retaliate, and so on. It's completely demoralizing, and America's they'll support that.
Yeah, we'll support the Neo-Ottoman Empire insofar as they don't threaten our interests, which beyond a few dust-ups, which, again, have been mostly resolved, it doesn't seem that that's been the case yet. And, again, if they're willing to assist us in this smuggling of migrants, which, I mean, under almost any other circumstances, I'm sure would have been human trafficking. Taking them to what they claimed was their destination and not to where they left from. Look, I'm not an expert in maritime law. I'm not an expert in international law, but something seems off about that. Look, correct me if I'm wrong.
If they're gonna allow Turkey to literally slap the Kurds for like the last 2-3 years not even in Turkey, but like in another country. Like it's. I mean, either America does not have a problem with this, or literally America is intimidated by Turkey, which they're not. You know.
Yeah, and that's definitely one of the weirder stories we've covered, but it is very telling of where things stand on the world stage, and with the decaying American empire's role abroad, defending our vital interests by making sure those economic migrants get into Western Europe, because those are consumers right there. Those are units of economic growth you are turning away. Now, I suppose while we're in the region, we might as well go to Libya proper. Let's get our map up here. Where did I do? So, a lot of air activity by the GNA, and it looks like the borders have more or less stabilized. Egypt has really put their foot down, which we'll get into with some of our Syria news. But things keep on heating up in Libya, and there hasn't been any major confrontations beyond the usual skirmishes. But like I said, air activity over Tripoli, over that northwestern quarter of Libya, it's like I said, it's picking up, and I would say as the weeks go on, it seems to be picking up more and more relevance than Syria, whether that be in the eyes
Mhm.
of Turkey, whether that be in the eyes of Russia, whether that be in the eyes of Europe, France, wherever. And I would say that's also testament to how things are starting to more or less stabilize in Syria, at least as much as they can at this point, to the point where the focus has shifted to Libya.
Yeah, and that's yet another reason why um, the need to put American troops in in Italy is so important, because it's a pressure. It's there to intimidate the Italians to, this is how you're going to behave. This is what you're going to accept. Uh, it's an intimidation, and in a way, Germany should be relieved how many are leaving. I think it was a lot of drama, honestly. Like it's a whole lot about nothing. Uh, but yes, Libya is becoming more important.
And like I said, you can see with those yellow indications on the maps, those are moves by Egypt. And I really think the pressure is coming on to Egypt, and that we're entering an Egyptian Turkish rivalry, which, I mean, we've seen before in history. That isn't anything new,
Yeah,
but we're seeing a rekindling of it, as it were, especially with their actions in Syria. And which is surprising because Egypt, at least I would say post Nasser Egypt from the 70s onwards, after their agreements with Israel, has played a role of more or less neutrality in the region and in the world. They do not want to take definitive sides on conflicts. On Syria, they called for peace and moderation from the beginning. They've always kept amicable ties with Saudi Arabia. They kept their distance in Libya, not really choosing one side or the other. No outstanding issues with Iran that I know of. And of course, Israel, I believe it's one of the only, if not the only, Arab state that recognizes Israel as a country. So you have that. And now you have them taking more emboldened moves against Turkey. And that will be interesting with the Suez Canal and how vital that is to global trade. I mean, less so than it was when it opened, of course, but I mean, not to downplay its importance, though.
yeah.
And its relationship with the United States, which it's been more or less amicable since, I would say, at least the War on Terror and the interventions following. Egypt has really tried to stay on the good side of the United States, whether that was under Mubarak's government or under Sisi's government. And now we're seeing Egypt take a stance against Turkey, which I would say by proxy is at least a stance against the NATO establishment, putting it in an odd coalition with Russia, France, and the Gulf states, and now is intervening on the side of Assad's forces in Syria. And I would say the big story about Libya is Egypt is starting to project its power outside its borders in its own region, and I don't think a lot of people anticipate that. I think people have spent too long underestimating Egypt. I think it's like what I know they're one of the world's preeminent military powers, like within the top 20 at least on paper, and now they are expressing their diplomatic influence. Now, beyond, of course, their ancient culture and things that have become relegated to sightseeing and tourist traps, they don't really have a cultural or religious basis that they can pull on, similar to Turkey, Saudi Arabia, or Iran. But what they do have is just, I would say, a country with immense power militarily and good geography.
Yes. The other thing is Egypt depends a lot on American aid, and they cannot do this without realizing what kind of jeopardy they're placing themselves in. Now, I know that they've bought a lot of aircraft from Russia and I think some anti-air system defense systems, but that's going to be interesting. If they're willing to do this, they have to know that there's going to be repercussions, which to me signals probably deals with China are coming or have already been established, and to a lesser extent with Russia.
Yeah, and again, I think Egypt is entering into the phase that Turkey was 2 or 3 years ago, where they're going to start making appeals to all of the international and regional powers. They can be everyone's best friend, but also act somewhat like a rogue. Now, I don't think they'll get to the degree of Turkey or Erdogan's tenacity, but I do think they're generally heading down that path.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I definitely agree with that. I didn't think they were serious until I read this morning that they're sending over 148 officers and fighting personnel to help in the greater Idlib area and around western Aleppo. Um, okay, it's not a big force. However, it's a big move. Again, it's symbolic, but it means a lot. And you put that next to them threatening, like Turkey, no less, and the GNA, that if you go after Citrus, you're going to feel our wrath. Like, we're going to attack you. And I think part of the reason they put that personnel in Syria is not only to, of course, state that they're on Syria's side, but is to demonstrate that they're also going to be serious about Libya.
Yeah, and I mean, Egyptian security and military forces have had quite a bit of experience with counterterrorism operations. There was a pretty big presence of ISIS in the Sinai Peninsula just until a few years ago, actually, and it was actually one of the more ignored fronts when everything was going on in Syria and Iraq and Libya. There was pretty much a hot war going on just in the Sinai. It was yeah. I'm surprised how many people overlooked it. But one last thing I want to say about Libya and by extension Egypt is I think Sisi, the current president, represents sort of a relic of an era that has passed and may, I don't know, bring back a revival. But what he is a military strongman ruling a sizable Middle Eastern country. He overthrew a theocratic government after the Muslim Brotherhood came to power. Because now you've seen a revival in the religious governments. Of course, Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states have always had the Islamic monarchies. Turkey is turning its back on secularism. Iran has been an Islamic republic since the revolution. Syria has had a, let's just say, complicated arrangement with its religious minorities in terms of sort of a mix between being a secular and a religious regime to the point where, again, I think what could most aptly be called a compromise regime of that sort. Iraq post Saddam Hussein returning to pretty much a Shia Muslim country, of course, with the occasional conflict with the Kurds and the Sunni Muslims. But I do think Sisi represents that last uh, secularist military strongman. And he's really the last of his breed in the Middle East. And I'm wondering if his influence will lead to a resurgence in similar regimes. I mean, Haftar sort of that in Libya. I mean, before he lost his marbles and started getting pushed back, his force started getting pushed back. But it seems like those are really the last holdout of that. And it's interesting now seeing with that, Egypt projecting their power outside the borders.
Yeah, the gloves are off. I mean, who knows what's in the works? I know that there's issues with the Nile and with respect to Ethiopia. I don't know if China is brokering something here that has allowed Egypt to decide to play a more free hand. They've had to deal with ISIS cells in the Sinai for quite a while. I think people remember the Russian passenger plane that was shot down. Of course, everyone was killed on board. Several tourist buses have been attacked by ISIS, and Egypt knows basically like the role of ISIS, who funds ISIS. When ISIS is the good guy, when are they the bad guy, and so on. And so they decided to make this move, and again, America will punish them for this. It will come eventually. How that rolls out, I don't know. And is it really going to impact them, or have they already begun making their bed with other great powers? I tend to think that's what has happened.
Yeah, and like I said, unless they do a snapback like Turkey did, where Turkey was looking eastward to Russia, to China, to even Iran at some points, and then in the past few months with Erdogan getting I don't know, just overconfident with himself, I guess you could say. He snapped
Mm.
right back into the American camp. There's no really outstanding issues between America and Turkey right now. We could see a similar course in Egypt. I don't know. I doubt it looking at this particular situation. But no less, things are going to heat up in Libya now that yet another power has gotten directly involved in the conflict. And like I said, this may be the restoration of another sort of military strongman in the Middle East, and we could just have Egypt and Libya representing that model of government that is sort of a relic of the 60s, 70s, 80s, I would say up until the War on Terror days when a lot of these guys got overthrown, like Saddam, like the Tunisian guy, like Gaddafi, and it's just heating up. That's all I can really say about this.
Hmm.
So, on that note,
It's kind of out of the blue, It's not what I expected in the spring.
yeah, I'm not. I mean, that's one of the funnier outcomes of the Arab Spring. They overthrew a guy like Mubarak to end up with somebody almost exactly like him. I mean, if you want, people always talk about Syria, and again, the fact that Assad is in power is astonishing. But if you want a complete refute of the Arab Spring, look no further than Egypt.
Yes. It's amazing how things can backfire.
And now, with that, we will go into Syria. So, more of the usual. As you said, there were Egyptian troops deployed to the greater Idlib area. Uh, there has been the big news: some mock bombings by the U.S., some air drills over Syrian government airspace and into that. Again, you can see that one patch by the Jordanian border we always talk about. And yeah, there's been quote unquote coalition aircrafts, that old coalition from when ISIS was a thing, conducting what were said to be live fire drills over Syrian airspace. Now, what this means, I have absolutely no idea. It doesn't seem. Again, there's usually a lead up to when these sort of things happen, to when we start saber rattling against Syria, and I haven't seen that lead up recently. Maybe it's because the media hasn't talked about certain substances being used on civilian populations, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Does that story work anymore? I think they tried it. I think they discarded it because it no longer holds the weight it once did. But something may be coming in Syria in that regard. And also, there has been a buildup of Israeli forces on the borders of the Golan Heights. That has also been a recent development, and that comes after what amounts to months of radio silence from Israel on the issue. Now, that also you also have to take into consideration the circumstances in Israel with the inconclusive election results, about 3-4 in a row at this point, with the virus crisis, with the West Bank crisis, and now they are doing their usual routine with Syria again. Even though, at this point, what I see now, with everything going on, with Trump's election prospects, with all things taken into consideration, I think Israel, like it did with the West Bank, its recent moves in the Golan Heights, which admittedly haven't been much yet, this is still very recent news, is a race against time move where they think our guy in DC, one of many, but that one in particular, it looks like his days are going to be numbered pretty soon. So we better
Yes.
do what we want now before, for example, a President Biden, or especially, as we were discussing earlier, a President Susan Rice yanks our leash. Because Susan Rice, to touch on that, is also noted for, again, a lot of the conservatives touch on this back in the day, Obama's anti Israel stances. She was very, I would say, adversarial towards Israel in terms of not because of their treatment of the Palestinians. Now, of course, that's the excuse they use, not because of any other thing they do, but because Israel stifles the American empire's goals in the Middle East, or at least the envision of the Blue Empire in the Middle East.
Right. And it should also be noted that I think after 2020, after the George Floyd protests and so on, if Biden is elected and he does not take a more critical stance on Israel, which now I think is definite, that buildup to viewing Israel as a white project on, on people of color, and led in at many times by liberal American Jews. That um, I'm not saying that they're going to achieve anything. I'm not saying that they're going to hold Israel's feet to the fire. But what I am saying, there will be a period of time where Israel cannot afford to be too aggressive, and because America's hand is forced right now. I mean, the Democrat hand is forced. Essentially, they have to now, and and like you say, it is a race against time. I think countries like Poland requesting American troops, Baltic countries requesting American troops, is basically, if they followed American news since late May till late July, what they've noticed is a country where it doesn't seem there's anyone really in charge, where the mob basically rules the street, and that by extension, the next 20 years will see a lot of this class that we're talking about, Biden, Trump, Hillary, they'll all be dead. And a lot of the people that, some of them even involved in the protests, will be in power. And the kind of animosity that will exist then thereafter will be far worse. And so I think a lot of these countries are thinking, maybe America will be such an incoherent place that they won't be able to project their power globally the way they've been used to in the past. I mean, we've discussed, like, invasion of Iran was probably possible in 2000 with a kind of a limited success of the kind that happened in Iraq, where they would have had to leave, but at least they destroyed it. But now, like, because the military itself is, like, not as white and the population is not as white, those kinds of wars with very little justification, with obvious connections to Israel and how this would actually serve Israel but not America, those are in play now. So yeah, to and a rather rambling point.
Oh, absolutely. I think I couldn't have said it better myself, but it is getting to the point where that old guard, that um, what are quite literally that boomer generation, will no longer be in power, either because they are 6 feet under or because they are just mentally incapable of leading. See Biden. And it will be, again, a lot of the people involved in the protest are supporting of them, and a lot of, I would say, the people from the Obama administration. People like, again, Susan Rice, who is in her 50s. That is going to be the next generation of leaders. It's going to be people like her. Now, for what the GOP has to offer, I don't know, Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz. It's probably the only people in that age range I can think of that have any name recognition within the GOP. But again, that's a topic for a different day. But moving back to Syria, there has been, of course, the usual skirmishes between Kurdish and Turkish forces, the slow encroachment onto Idlib, the chasing around of patrols, assassination of intelligence officers in eastern Syria, and yeah, beyond that, it's been a pretty routine last week or two since we did miss last week episode in Syria. So with that, I suppose Belarus.
Yeah. Unfortunately, there hasn't been that much. It's been more of the usual actually, and I mean, another important intelligence asset to Syria was assassinated, but then every other week I'm telling you the same thing. But yeah.
Yeah.
Why don't we move to Belarus?
So there are, of course, protests against the first and only president of Belarus, who is, of course, Alexander Lukashenko, has ruled since the collapse of the Soviet Union. Again, he's been sort of known as what could best be described as a meme leader. He's existed. He's always in that ridiculous, not always, but he's oftentimes in that ridiculous field marshal uniform. It's like the Soviet Union never collapsed just within this small patch of Eastern European land. And he's won every election almost completely uncontested. And there's an election coming up this fall. They happen every 5 years. And this would be, let's see, since 1990, I think, is when they had their presidential election and everything. This would be his 30th year in power, if anything. So, I mean, generally he's been an inoffensive leader. The people of Belarus haven't seemed to have much dissent from him. There were some protests the last elections, but really he's just been the typical post-Soviet, and I don't want to call him the strongman, because despite his martial uniform, despite all of that, it's really a relatively tame authoritarian regime when compared to some of these ones in the Middle East, some of these ones in Asia, some of these ones in Central Asia, like Uzbekistan, or wherever that one guy was that had like the golden statue commission of himself. That guy, that was considered one of the most repressive societies in the world at some point. But again, with that out of the way, Lukashenko, of course, has taken Belarus into an odd direction since the beginning of 2020 with American oil and gas deals, with a lot of these things. And now you have protests among the population about the election and about the legitimacy of his power. And I haven't quite parsed these out yet. I'm not sure whether this is a situation where Lukashenko in Belarus is the pro-Russian guy that Russia wants to stay in power, and that this is a Western-backed protest movement, whether Lukashenko has oscillated westward, which has angered the majority Russian population in Belarus, who desires closer ties to Russia and want him out, whether this is a case like in Bulgaria, where it's EU and NATO infighting, or possibly a rare case, maybe it's pro-Russian faction infighting. Now, out of all of those, I really do not know what to make of these protests. I've seen a little bit of everything in them.
Yeah, this was one of the things I remember back in 2014, 2015, when I was watching some Russian analysts, and they were quite afraid of what might happen with Belarus. In fact, basically what we are seeing happening now. I remember they successfully stopped a Soros GAOP in St. Petersburg, and successfully petitioned against, basically they disseminated some information about what was happening in Minsk. And I think the guy's name was Starikov or something. It was, I think, Starikov. And well, I mean, that has happened now. So like the build up to it, I'm sure that they are ready to see him go, and I'm very sure that the West is there, America in particular, playing an important role. What's going to come of it? I'm not sure. I'm sure that they will try to put Belarus on the same path as Ukraine. Um, the momentum is really, really picking up. Like I can't overstate that. The other bit of news, of course, is they found 30 members of Wagner Group Russians that were going to like start doing really crazy shit. I noticed how sort of easygoing and blasé RT News was about this, and that made me think like, okay, they've there's a scoop here that I haven't heard yet, and they're not particularly threatened by this. And so, as it turned out, the main question was, well, initially the story was that they were wearing uniforms in the airport, but like the video shows that they're not. They're wearing civilian clothes. Then it's like, well, okay, if this was like a really secret mission to undermine Belarus democracy, why do they all like stay in the same like low-rise hotel thing? It's a very unimpressive place. But why do they all stay there? And why did none of them have weapons? Like, I thought, what, like, how is this? How is this like? Because the theory has been that they were supposed to fly to Egypt or Libya, and this was a misunderstanding. Lukashenko, I think, pounced on it. So I think what we're seeing is that Lukashenko is very desperate. He's kind of, I mean, everybody's taking a page out of Erdogan's book right now, where middle powers or little powers are trying to play both sides. And the truth is, Lukashenko does not have the same kind of leash, the same kind of lead that Erdogan has got. And he's panicking right now. I think he's definitely afraid he's going to be ruled out. And blaming Russia right now is like, it's not going to help him. He's going to lose power, and that'll be that. It just won't matter. None of it will matter.
I tend to agree with where you're going there, and you did bring up the Wagner Group mercenaries getting arrested, which it's interesting because the Belarusian state security is still named the KGB. So you had this headline that the KGB just arrested Russian mercenaries. You're like, oh, what's going on there? But then you realize, oh, it's in Belarus. Belarus is still LARPing as the Soviet Union. I think it was either them or Kazakhstan that was like the Soviet Union for 4 days after Russia technically wasn't the Soviet Union. It was some ridiculous story like that. But I think what happened is Lukashenko got a big head about himself, thought he could play both sides, and when he kissed the ring of neoliberalism, when he stretched that hand up to the West, they shook his hand, but then shoved a dagger in his back. They said,
yes,
you've served our purpose. Now we have no use for you. Now, the big difference I see between this and Ukraine is, number one, Ukraine is much more geographically significant with the Black Sea, which, I mean, Crimea sort of snubbed those plans, and with their farmland, especially in relation to the European Union and Germany in particular. Belarus, they do have the farmland, more or less, but they don't, of course, have that same geographic significance with the Black Sea. I mean, they are right on Russia's border, admittedly. And the one other thing I see as a difference between them and Ukraine is Ukraine had much more of an independent ethnic identity. There's more of a distinct Ukrainian language. There's more of a distinct Ukrainian people. Like you get in the Western Ukraine with that, as opposed to, again, there's a large Russian population in Ukraine, but in Belarus, day to day, like something like 85% of people speak Russian as compared to 40-something% in Ukraine. There's not really that ethnic divide they can exploit. Belarusian is hardly a language used at all. Even Lukashenko uses Russian in his official addresses. The government uses, it's an official language of Belarus. And in Ukraine, again, they've had their laws there with the non-Ukrainian languages, which have been, again, a bit of it just, again, that also warrants its own episode of discussion, but I don't know, maybe someday. But point being is, I don't think there's the same anti-Russian sentiments that exist in Ukraine. I don't think they exist in Belarus, at least to the same extent. I'm not saying there's zero, But I'm saying I think the population sees itself is much, much more Russian than Ukrainians do, and there's not really that much they can play on. I mean, what is Belarusian identity? Most people could broadly, most people in these circles informed these topics could broadly give you a difference between Ukrainians and Russians. But when it comes to Belarusians, most people don't. I don't know that much about Belarusians.
Yeah, I mean, I think the strategic importance. One, it's right on Russia's border. Two, to get into Kaliningrad, there's a small strip of land that Russia needs to access vis-a-vis Belarus to get in there. So you take Belarus, now you've isolated Kaliningrad. This could really present a problem for Russia. Three, you have some Polish hotheads that are like, if Russia does anything to you, fellow Slavic brothers, we're there, right? Like, so there's this LARPing, like, we won't let you down the way we let down Ukraine. Like, you literally share a border with Ukraine as well, but you all stayed home, or you all went to Ireland or whatever. And so, and of course, with the move, I mean, I discussed this like a month ago. American troops going into Poland is there to antagonize Russia, is there to create a situation where Russia missteps. And, those troops are going to be in Poland. I'm very sure that they're going to have now exercises right along the border of Belarus from, say, Lithuania and Latvia and Poland. Essentially, it's a grasping move, right? Essentially, NATO is saying Belarus is ours now. What are you going to do? Right? How long is it going to be before we put missiles there that can reach you before you can reach us? Of course, Russia has always maintained that if America attacks, Poland and Germany will be annihilated first. So, if the Poles and Germans want to die on America's behalf, they're welcome to.
Yeah. But yeah, I totally see why they would do, like, why they want Belarus to flip, obviously. But again, I don't think there's sort of the same sentiments they can stir up like they did in Ukraine. And I'm not saying it's impossible, but I think it's much less likely that they get some sort of anti-Russia regime in power as they did in Ukraine in Belarus.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this is, again, because just some things about Belarus is very Belarus. It's very Slavic. There's very few minorities. It's also extremely clean. It's a very, very clean and safe place to live. Now, it's not poor. It's not rich everywhere. It's fact you may not call it rich, but it it's clean. It's livable. It's not like I don't know, a shithole. And I think this probably, an aspirational middle class that wants to see Belarus go in a different direction. And it could be that, their problems have more to do with Lukashenko than they have to do with Russia. They could be perceiving Lukashenko as someone, and this is really to support your point you made. They see Lukashenko as a Soviet relic, as somebody who's been in power for far too long, and is the one that is stopping them from achieving the kind of, let's say, life or lifestyle that they want, and that the secret is to align and partner yourself with the West in order to achieve that. So there's, Lukashenko has basically already played his card. Nobody can accuse that Lukashenko is a Putin puppet.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that, and it is a very just funny situation with all of that, and really, again, I do think you make a good point that it might just be Lukashenko, and that Russia might not necessarily be the problem, that the people there might not care that he's too pro-Russia. It's more that, again, why are we still living in the 70s? Soviet Union might be the bigger concern. And Who knows? The ultimate outcome of this could be Georgia 2.0, where Russian tanks come within 20 miles of Minsk, and it really is just, I don't know a better word for it, better term for it, a bitch slap that puts them back in line. It could very well just be
Hmm.
that. And I wouldn't
Hmm.
I wouldn't be surprised if it ends like that. And hell, it might not even take that because again, there's a lot more distinct cultural difference between Georgia and Russia than again Belarus and Russia. So
Yeah,
again,
I mean, the only thing I can think of is access to Kaliningrad.
yeah, that
That Belarus decides to deny access to Kaliningrad, which will be for, a stupid reason, some stupid reason. Of course, there's other countries involved in this, right? Like this also involves Lithuania, for instance. Um, Now, and that's there's a written law why they have to respect that, so on and so on. Now, if this, I mean, this is just okay. This is hot off the shelf, hot take, conspiracy theory. If they could prove some kind of nefarious action on the part of the Russians, and they have to do this for their own safety and for the safety of the Baltics and blah blah blah. No, I'm quite serious,
yeah,
right? And then
yeah.
Russian troops move in. Sorry, American troops move into that area because guess what? They're already there, and they're going to be permanently there. That's what I think this move is about. It's about isolating Kaliningrad and seeing what will Russia do as a result.
Yeah, I can see the takes already. Kaliningrad is the new Danzig. Belarus is the new Poland. He really is Putler. Like I can see them going with that already.
Yeah,
Like, oh, Russia, isolated from one's exclaves, they're gonna invade their neighbors, and it's gonna be just like that time in the 1930s when Pencil Mustache Man did the thing. And I don't know
yeah, yeah,
that might be what they go for, but ultimately things are heating up, and again, I don't get the same feeling I do that I did from the Maidan. Not that's not entire. That's like an entirely different thing, but again, there's some key differences I laid out there, and again, I think time will tell, as with most
yeah,
things.
yeah,
So, I think that wraps that up.
yeah. I can't believe he didn't choose Tim Cook.
I I can't believe Biden did not pick the fascist option. He was on the course to be
Yeah,
our guy. He doesn't like he's in favor of traditional marriage. He doesn't want to destroy the family. He wants to keep the traditional family structure. He doesn't want forced integration. And then he doesn't pick Tim Cook, and it's a very
yeah.
sad kind of day with
I mean,
that.
Tim Cook is married, right? Isn't Tim Cook married to a
Yes,
man? Like they could have had like the first straight and gay in a presidential team.
yeah, yeah,
That
and
would have been
then
awesome.
they could have invited Buttigieg to the administration in some capacity. It would
Wow.
it would have been fantastic, and we missed out on it. And this is proof that that Biden, I almost called him Obama, is he's a right winger. It's very sad,
Yeah,
and
we really are a matriarchy.
yeah, yeah, and let me just wipe a tear away from my eye as I say thank you guys for tuning in and goodbye.
Thank you, guys.